Welcome to meeting number 112 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I'd like to remind all members of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, and all comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Thank you all for your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, October 31st, 2024, the committee resumes its study of the impact of the criteria for awarding federal funding on research excellence in Canada. It's now my pleasure to welcome, from Colleges and Institutes Canada, Perry Johnston, President and Chief Executive Officer. From the U15 Group of Canadian Research Universities, Dylan Hanley, Executive Vice President. And from Universities Canada, Gabriel Miller, President and Chief Executive Officer. So welcome to the three witnesses. Up to 5 minutes will be given for your opening remarks, after which we'll proceed with rounds of questions. Mr. Johnson, I'll start with you. You have the opportunity to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Perry Johnston, President and CEO of Colleges and Institutes Canada, and on behalf of our 134 member colleges, institutes, polytechnics, and CEGEP, I want to thank the committee for making the time for this study. When I was here for my appearance on the Capstone organization, we talked about the fact that we must ensure that federal research investments lead to real and tangible impacts in the daily lives of Canadians. Results that support economic prosperity and social well-being for all, drive community and business innovation, and respond to the biggest challenges we face as a country. To do this, we must reimagine how we currently invest in research and reevaluate what we value. We must redefine how we assess and award research to move beyond concepts of excellence defined primarily within a university-centered approach. Nous devons également nous concentrer sur...
We also have to focus on the impact, relevance, and scope of research. Impact-driven research implies that you have to begin by identifying a problem and then designing a research program to mobilize the appropriate partners and end users to solve the problem, using all the available research tools and applying inclusive assessment criteria, valuing applications and impact. Impact-driven research makes it possible to build better houses faster, to increase the variety of crops that can resist drought, and to determine how to give incentives to farmers to plant those drought-resistant crops. It also implies being able to develop new methods to mobilize genomic tools in local clinics. This is exactly the kind of research that's being done in colleges and institutes.
Colleges lead partnered, problem-driven, and real-time research that generates applied knowledge and de-risks technology development and adaptation. This results in the on-the-ground benefits through improved knowledge translation and mobilization, IP staying with the local business partner, and greater technology uptake by local partners in priority economic and social sectors. In 2021-22, our members led more than 8,000 applied research projects, resulting in 6,500 new processes, products and services, and prototypes in areas like housing construction and advanced manufacturing, climate-smart agriculture, food production, and social innovation. 99% of our partners are Canadian companies and nonprofits, keeping the fruits of our research at home in Canada. If we want to optimize the impact of federal research investments, the following three recommendations must be actioned. First, the federal granting agencies and research funders must redefine and rebalance the weighting of criteria currently used to award federal funding to ensure they adequately assess and reward research impact. This includes looking beyond traditional metrics of excellence, such as publication records, citations, and other metrics aimed at establishing expertise in academic research. criteria such as partner uptake of research outputs, capacity of a project to develop new IP or develop a novel application of an existing technology, or policy reports that lead to improved implementation pathways or indicators that speak to research impact. Second, federal research funders must ensure merit review committees include representation from a diversity of institution types and from end users, industry and community partners, who are able to provide a more holistic ecosystem perspective on research programs and how to ensure benefits on the ground have broad reach. Currently, most merit review committees are almost exclusively composed of representatives from universities. To support impact, review committees must include voices from across the research ecosystem, including colleges and end users and policymakers familiar with effective implementation and delivery of research results. Third, it is time for ICED and the federal granting agencies to expand eligibility for colleges and institutes in all existing Tri-Council programming. Right now, colleges are not eligible as lead applicants for NSERC's Alliance program, its flagship partnership initiative. In addition, we must address informal barriers such as not allowing research grants to cover college faculty course release time or to hire replacement faculty to carry out research projects. Canadians and their communities expect their federal research programs to deliver for them. Enacting these 3 recommendations will help achieve this. Merci. Thank you.
Merci, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Hanley, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to all the members of the Science and Research Standing Committee for the opportunity to appear before you today. U15 Canada is an association of Canada's leading research universities, and today's study is concerned with the impact of federal funding policies on research excellence in Canada. Promoting excellence is at the very heart of our work at U15, and I'm confident Canadians should be very proud of the global impact and competitiveness of our research university system, which punches way above its weight internationally, including in value for money. Taking the University of Toronto as an example, last year, Nature ranked it #2 for impact and health research in the world, after Harvard and ahead of even Johns Hopkins. And yet it also educates more students every year than the entire Ivy League combined. This is only one example of how our leading research universities deliver value to Canada and Canadians at a low cost to entry. U15 universities alone award 160,000 degrees a year, including the vast majority of doctors and dentists in Canada, developing a crucial pipeline of talent. We also know that research conducted at our universities has real-world impact. From research at the University of Saskatchewan to protect the Canadian pork industry from the risks of African swine fever, to research at the University of Alberta in carbon capture and storage aimed at enhancing a clean energy future for our country, to leading work on Arctic monitoring at Université Laval that will help track the impact of climate change and enforce our Arctic sovereignty. Leading research universities also drive innovation. From artificial intelligence to agriculture, partnership between businesses and post-secondary institutions is a defining feature of our R&D system in Canada, with us ranking 3rd in the G7 and in the top 10 in the OECD in the percentage of private sector R&D done in partnership with post-secondary institutions. It's also important to underscore that our research universities deliver impact that's truly pan-Canadian. Our universities act as hubs of expertise across extensive networks that bring together other post-secondary institutions, research hospitals, innovative industries, and community organizations. In 2022-2023 alone, just our 15 universities collaborated with over 3,600 different partners and organizations on tri-agency funded research in nearly every community and riding across this country. Canadian research excellence has been made possible in part due to a long-standing cross-party consensus. The Chrétien government brought in the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, launched the Canada Foundation for Innovation and the Canada Research Chairs program. The Harper government made major investments in the CFI, launched the Canada First Research Excellence Fund, or CFREF, the Canada Excellence Research Chairs, and funded excellence-based scholarships. And the current government's made significant investments in investigator-led research, the New Frontiers in Research Fund, and crucial programs in quantum, AI, and genomics. CFREF is expressly designed to create globally competitive platforms for Canadian research strengths. These networks have impact across the country and include projects in important evolving areas for Canada, including the links between brain and heart health at the University of Ottawa, climate change and ocean science at Dalhousie, and the health and well-being of children at the University of Calgary. Another example is the Canada Excellence Research Chairs program, which attracts world-leading scholars to Canada, along with their talented teams to create clusters of excellence and expertise here. Another major pillar of our excellence system is the Canada Research Chairs program, which provides funding for universities to hire some of the best and brightest researchers across all areas of research. To ensure Canada's research enterprise can continue to flourish, I'm going to suggest the following key principles. Number one, the best ideas. It's important to note that excellence in research rests on the foundation of peer review, wherein experts in the fields are the ones to judge which proposals move forward and receive funding. Number two, strong, healthy institutions. Our world-class research universities are a national strength that, again, all Canadians should be proud of. But we're facing unprecedented financial challenges because of decades of stagnant or declining real government funding and turbulence around international students. And number three, unlocking impact. Our institutions are working hard to unlock the full potential impact of research in our businesses, communities, and society through entrepreneurship programs, connectivity hubs for business, and through extensive partnerships with governments and nonprofits in the social sector. We certainly can do more, and we should do it together. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. We'll now go to Mr. Miller. You have the floor for a 5-minute opening statement.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Gabriel Miller. I'm the President and CEO of Universities Canada, the national voice of Canada's public universities. I want to compliment the committee on its decision to undertake this study. I hope it's the start of an ongoing discussion about an issue that's critical to Canada's future. As our challenges become more complex and our technology more advanced, research excellence must be at the heart of any serious plan to create jobs, increase our prosperity, and improve our quality of life. Federal research investments are an essential pillar of our higher education system, a system that gives millions of Canadians a pathway to expand their career opportunities, increase their job security, and to earn higher salaries that help them pay the rising costs of owning a home and supporting a family. Our research system is a training ground for the future doctors, engineers, and entrepreneurs who we need to support our economy and meet the needs of our aging population. And it's through research that Canada can create the knowledge and develop the talent to fuel innovation and productivity across vital sectors of our economy, whether it's energy, agriculture, manufacturing, or arts and culture. Today, I want to leave you with 3 broad recommendations. First, we must build on the core principles of Canada's outstanding research system, a system built over decades with support of successive governments and members from all parties. These principles vary from program to program, but almost always include the need to make an original contribution to the research field, the need to provide training opportunities for highly qualified personnel, and to demonstrate that the project is feasible with the resources available. Secondly, I want to recommend we continue the difficult and often imperfect work of expanding opportunities to more people and more communities. What does that mean? It means we have to help universities of every size and in every region contribute their fullest to the research enterprise. The Research Security Fund should be strengthened so that smaller universities aren't held back by the costs of meeting a growing administrative burden, and larger schools aren't slowed down. It means we must strengthen the unique role of universities as a forum for independent thought, discussion, and discovery, where a broad range of political and ideological perspectives are engaged and explored. No one should be excluded from participating in scientific debate and discovery, conservative, progressive, or otherwise. It means we must continue the fight against racism and discrimination in all their forms, and reduce the barriers that have deprived too many people of the opportunity to contribute their abilities and perspectives. Finalement, on doit soutenir.
And finally, we must support research in French, which faces its own unique challenges in terms of either applying or publishing in French. Systemic barriers persist in French language research, more specifically with gaps in success levels based on language. We're encouraged that the government has struck this committee to review this matter. A new capstone organization could also promote excellence of research in French.
Described is not a perception of diversity. It's a commitment to unleashing the incredible talents of our country. It's a vision we should embrace with passion, but with care. We must undertake this work with humility. Many Canadians have questions, concerns, and criticisms about the most effective ways of expanding opportunity and about some of what they see and hear being done in the name of diversity. We need to be listening, we in the university sector. We need to be learning, and we need to be engaging in these discussions. We must be evaluating the tools that are used and prioritizing those that reduce barriers while strengthening research excellence. I want to close by noting that the upcoming supply votes include important research and graduate scholarship funding for next year. I can't stress enough the importance that this funding will have for graduate students at institutions across Canada and for creating a better foundation to address many of the issues I've discussed today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, and thank you all for your opening remarks. I'll now open the floor to our members for questions. Please be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed. We'll start this off, please, with MP Lobb for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Hanley. Thanks for coming here today, and Mr. Gaffield always does a fine job when he's here as well. My question for you is, a lot of grant dollars that I've been able to look at, and I'm sure it's well into the millions, it has nothing to do with research in Canada. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to be ignorant as a society and not look beyond our own borders, but should we be looking at more dollars invested in Canada and looking at a Canada first approach to our research? What do you think?
Sure, thanks for the question. It's a good question. I'll say first off that in terms of the dispersal of funds amongst the councils, just shy of 80% of all new funds that go into the councils go for health research, natural sciences, and engineering, to NSERC and CIHR. So the vast, vast majority go there, and I think lots of it may be partnered outside of here, but it isn't research on something specific to Canada or not specific to Canada. In terms of the value of research on issues around the globe, I think it's crucial for us to be studying things that happen in Canada, but also things that happen around the globe. My own personal background in graduate research was studying the Middle East and nuclear nonproliferation related to Israel and Iran. Now, am I bringing it to bear in the work I'm doing now for universities? I'm not sure, but I do think it's important for Canadians to be engaged in issues that are important around the world. I think that what's more interesting is actually a lot of the research that's taken place in recent years into things that are history here in Canada, and aspects of Indigenous cultures, of local regionist cultures, et cetera, that we may not have understood otherwise unless we were engaged in that.
Your studies that you mentioned, that's very impressive. I would never question that, because that's a very interesting topic to study. But I see research grants given out to study Dolly Parton's lyrics. The committee's heard me go, Chad, I think he gets a sore stomach why I bring it up so much. Studying the Maiden Museum in Ukraine. The list goes on and on and on. And you'd think it might be a couple, but I would say it's hundreds. And it's in the millions of dollars. And I've just tried to test it out, and maybe I cherry pick it, but when when I'm around my riding on the weekend and people say, hey, what are you doing? I'll say, well, hey, we're doing these studies, and here's some things we're studying, and they can't believe that their taxpayer dollars are going to it. And I'm trying to present it in a fair manner. So some of the stuff you're mentioning, absolutely. It's great. People would be proud of this. But should we take a step back and look at some of these projects we're funding? Really?
Look, I think the peer review process, which I talked about, is about peers in a discipline judging what is a well-crafted research project according to the scientific method, right? You put forward a hypothesis and you're going to test it. They're going to say, is this the right experiment to run, whether that's in the social sciences or in the hard or medical sciences. I think that research reflects Canada as a whole. And as I said, the vast majority of it is in areas related to the harder sciences, medical research, et cetera. We do have research in fields in the social sciences that I know you can go through and question. I guess what I would say is we are a reflection of Canada as a whole. So just like there are arts and there are nonprofit organizations, there are research in all those fields as well.
Fair enough. But I don't know how many times we've had people come here and say, Ben, you cannot challenge the people that make these decisions. Ben, it's unhealthy. It's not wise to go and look and cherry pick. We have to look at everything. But I go down the list and I'm like, I can't believe it. Like, here's one. And my optometrist said I need bifocals, and you know what? He's right, I do. I can't hardly read this. Understanding and addressing the mental health impacts of unpaid care workers on women in Bogota, Colombia. Now, if it was in Canada, I'd say great. But in Bogota, Colombia, why doesn't Bogota, Colombia pay for that study? And we'll do a study in Canada, maybe on unpaid work. What value is that to the Canadian taxpayer?
Sure. Look, I think that the value to the research enterprise is of the ability for researchers to explore any topic that they are interested in. I take it. I mean, look,
we're having a good conversation here, and honestly. I know you have to defend it. Ms. Johnson, does it frustrate you a little bit? And I don't want you and Dylan to get into a fight here, but does it frustrate you slightly when you're trying to get funding for your colleges and research money, and you know the studies, you're in the same groups as these guys. Does it not frustrate you that you can't get a little bit your way? Come on.
I think for me the issue is that, as I tried to set out, the college approach to research in this country has until now not been valued in the way that we need to value it to drive impact for Canadians. And I think that, as I tried to set out, there's a need to look at the ecosystem that we invest in this country and start to look at, if we want to involve those that are partnering at the local level on problems that local folks have defined, we need to reinvest in college-led research as well.
Look at Elon Musk's robot. That I saw him laying bricks and doing all this work. Wouldn't it be great to have one of those at every college in Canada and have young, brilliant minds think, how can we make this work for us? How can we? Absolutely. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great to apply for a project, a federal project, and do something like that?
Absolutely. I think our view is that there is an opportunity here to really be bold and rethink the opportunity to reinvest in college-led research in this country. Right now, we get 3% of the overall federal investments, and I've said to this committee before, I'd love to see it at 10%.
Yeah, that's well over our time. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but okay. So MP Jazik, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming here today. I do hope you had the opportunity to review some of the testimony that we heard last week, because some of my questions will concentrate on what we heard, and I'd like your opinions. My first question, Mr. Miller. Last week we did hear some witnesses that claimed that by pursuing equity, diversity, inclusion, you inevitably reduce the research output of an institution or country. So perhaps you could tell us from your experience, to what extent does EDI play a part in the evaluation of applications for funding, for federal funding? There was a claim that it was akin to affirmative action, which I have always seen as something applied to human resources and hiring of individuals, not to research applications. So could you tell us a little bit about the weighting of this sort of analysis related to EDI?
Through you, Madam Chair, first, thank you very much for the question. I should say I'm not a researcher myself, but of course I've been working with universities for several years, and now with Universities Canada for 8 months. What I would say is, in all of my interactions with the Tri-Council and with researchers in our community, what has been paramount in all of their work and in their assessment of research projects has been excellence, the potential to really create change inside the discipline, the ability to contribute to the training of graduate students, and evaluate it on the basis of merit. There's no question that there's been growing interest and discussion, and in some cases policies around efforts to expand opportunities so that a broader group of Canadians can participate and contribute their perspectives and talent, which ultimately is in itself a major contributor to excellence. So my observation has been there is a concerted effort in the community to expand opportunity, but to support merit and excellence, not to compete with it.
Thank you so much. And perhaps I'll turn to Mr. Hanley and ask you the same question. To what extent do you see EDI being considered, and do you have any comments in relation to it?
Listen, I think all of our institutions are committed to the principle of ensuring that all Canadians get a fair shake, both in terms of accessing a university education, should they wish to, which is still the most transformative action you can take for your economic future, and we think there are obviously other benefits to it in addition to economic, and that the greatest percentage can participate specifically in the research enterprise. In terms of EDI in the last number of years, I think that in our institutions, like society as a whole, there's been a greater recognizance of historic and traditional systemic barriers and attempts to get rid of those or to open the field and the table to more people and make sure that they have a fair shake. I think in the last couple of years, and this is a pretty recent phenomenon that we've been, undertaking this with the level of energy that has been the last couple of years. There have been criticisms of some of the specific measurements and programs that have gone on. I think we're open to those criticisms. I think we're open to making things better inside of our institutions. There are regularly programmatic reviews to look at, and this isn't just for these policies, it's for any policies that are going on across the administration. So I think we are committed to it. And I think in the research enterprise, again, as my colleague said, this is about actually opening up the diversity of viewpoints that are able to come to the table and improve research. And we know in corporate teams, diversity of perspective and viewpoints makes things better and leads to better outcomes.
Thank you. Ms. Johnston, you've talked about the peer review process and opening it up to a certain extent, and particularly we've heard from you looking at applied research, and I think many of us have been very convinced by your arguments. Do you have any particular opinion on the use of equity, diversity, inclusion in that peer review process?
Thanks so much for the question. And I think you're right. The point of view where I come from is, as you said, our sector is undertaking research always in a partnered approach. So we start from the point of view that we are responding to problems identified by community organizations, by business partners, by others in the community that have a particular problem they think is important to solve, and can the college work with them on that. And by being accessible and open to responding to those business or community problems, we're already getting a perspective around a diversity of perspectives. I do think that it's really important to have a diversity of perspectives on a research problem, but also a diversity of lenses on the benefits of research. And I think this is the other part where I'm really interested in talking about broadening review committees that included a representative set of voices that includes end users, those for whom research is perhaps intended to benefit. How does it benefit people differently? So this is where I think we need to also be thinking about diversity of approaches of who's on the team, but also who's benefiting from the research. I think is part of where we're interested in looking at a rebalancing.
That's our time. Thank you so much. So now we'll turn to MP Blanchard-Choquin for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins qui se joindraient à nous.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the witness for joining us for this important study. First question for Mr. Miller. Have universities of Canada adopted the San Francisco Declaration? No, but I think 9 universities have already approved it. And how many do you represent? 97. 98 soon, I see. No. Yukon was the 97th. So out of 97 universities, only 6 of your members have signed this San Francisco Declaration. Yes. What explains the fact that your university group has not signed on? I think this is an ongoing conversation. I think the principles are principles for which there's a lot of support in our community. I think there will be a larger number who will be supporting this initiative in the future. Mr. Miller, can you tell me, in your experience, you were saying that you've been working in the university milieu for a long time. What year was the San Francisco Declaration adopted? I have to confirm. I think it was, I'll tell you, 2013. Yes. So that means you've been thinking about it for a long time. Yes. So you're saying 9 out of 97 universities signed. You know, the San Francisco Declaration was to have assessment criteria that favored more equitable, transparent, inclusive criteria, favoring and promoting true impact of research on society. Does that make sense to you? The principles have a lot of value. I think that gives a good indication of where we should be heading in the future. So, Mr. Miller, you're saying that these are good values, but they're not important enough, that over the last 10 years, your group of 97 universities has actually been able to spend time on this? Do you recognize that by choosing not to buy into the San Francisco Declaration, you are recognizing that it can exclude researchers whose work does not correspond to the impact-driven criteria, especially those who are publishing in French? I know that the principles of the initiative were to adopt a broader range of factors to be used in assessing research. I would like to say that, yes, there's the question of officializing support for the initiative, but there's also the fact of doing the work. Several of the universities across Canada are supporting research that has direct impact. The objective of the San Francisco Declaration is to promote more inclusive and fair science, for which initiatives were taken in your group to guarantee that researchers, independent of language or discipline, are assessed fairly and transparently. What have you done in your group of universities based on the research funding criteria? We strongly support a research system in Canada that is more balanced for French-speaking researchers in particular, because what we see now is the success rate for French language researchers is lower than for English language researchers, and that's not acceptable. We have to change that. Mr. Miller, you say that you recognize that there are disparities between French-speaking and English-speaking researchers, so you should sign on to the San Francisco Declaration, because that declaration uses impact factors, and impact factors reduce the importance of French language publication. So I'd like to pursue this line of questioning to understand your reasoning, because you say you represent 97 universities. You are the biggest group of universities in Canada. So if you did not sign on to the San Francisco Declaration, what other initiatives or methods have you been developing to improve research assessment and evaluation so that it could be fair and qualitative? Well, as I already mentioned, one of our most important positions is that we have to make improvements and change our research system so that the success rate for French language researchers be equivalent to that of English language researchers. There's another initiative, and this is to grow the fund to support research security. At this time, the smaller institutions can't access that funding. I understand, and I fully agree with that, Mr. Miller. If you're telling me that you're sensitive to French language research, you know that in the evaluation criteria, which are basically peer-reviewed, there's a self-assessment of language. So they asked if somebody feels that they have properly mastered French, they could be recognized for this. They could fill that in. And in French language research, it said that there were evaluators who don't adequately master French, not adequately enough to be able to assess the research. So should we be doing a language assessment of the competencies of the evaluators on the committees? I think it's absolutely essential for there to be strong representation of researchers who are absolutely fluent in French. And we have to use the most effective tools with this goal in mind.
I appreciate that. Now we will turn to MP Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you for being here today. I think I'm just getting new to the new microphone system here. I think I'm on. I'm going to start with Ms. Johnson. You mentioned that you felt that merit review committees were biased toward universities. Just wondering if you could expand on that and how that impacts the criteria for awarding federal funding, and how we could fix that while maintaining excellent research across the country.
I think that what we need to look at is, are these committees broadly representative of those that are part of the research ecosystem? And I think what we have seen is that to date, there have been gaps in terms of that representation that includes those that are the end users of research, those that are familiar with policy implementation, and those that come from the college system. And I think that because our premise is that excellence and relevance and impact should be part of how we think about the investments we make in research. And if you accept that premise, which I think is incumbent upon us to start thinking about very actively as we think about our research investments, then it stands to reason that the merit review and the review committees that we're making are representative of those in the research ecosystem. I would say that another opportunity for us to look at are two-stage reviews. How can we look at research, particularly challenge-based research funding, that takes a first scientific and technical stage of review, but then has a second impact review that is also composed of committee members that are broadly representative of those who will be benefiting from the research. So in our view, it's about being more intentional about a representation that's inclusive of those that are part of the research ecosystem.
Okay, thanks. Turn to Mr. Hanley now with U15. We heard from witnesses last week. One of the recommendations from one witness was to shift all research funding to the provincial governments from the federal government. I'm just wondering if you could comment on what that would accomplish, if anything.
I'm not sure it would accomplish much. There is provincial research funding, as you know, although at different levels across provinces and not the lion's share of research. Traditionally, research has been a federal responsibility. In the United States, it's the same. And I don't know what shifting it to the provinces would do practically in terms of improving outcomes or excellence, et cetera. And I will say, I mean, the provinces work collaboratively with the federal government, I guess, in shaping the system. I mean, they're the ones sort of shaping the institutions, shaping the enrollment corridors, and regulating, post-secondary institutions across the country. And so I think they do have a bearing in how things get shaped.
Do you want to comment on that, Mr. Miller?
Yeah, I think it's a terrible suggestion. And defies all logic. I mean, among other things, would it really make sense in this country to have provinces as small as some of ours try and recreate a federal research system in a world where Canada's already up against heavyweights, money-wise, population-wise. We need to make sure that we're making the absolute most of our investments in this area and acting, as one of the previous members said, in a way that's going to make the biggest benefit to Canada's interests. So no, I think this is a success story, what we've built in Canada. It has its flaws, but the notion that turning it into 10 systems is not supportable.
And sorry?
A minute 36.
Minute 30 seconds. Well, I'll give you 30 seconds each maybe to just talk about how overall funding supports government funding, provincial, federal, for universities and colleges is essential for research. We've heard some testimony again about how much universities take in terms of a percentage of some research funding, but just maybe we'll start with Ms. Johnson and try to get you all in about why we need to, I think, increase the core university funding, college funding across the board.
Well, I think fundamentally we need to invest in, from our point of view, college applied research in a way that's more robust, and in our case, we'd love to see it to 10% of the overall research investments in this country, in part because we are those on the coalface working with business and community organizations that want problems solved at the local level. And they often are those that want to come and have a new product, service, technology that's adapted or developed to respond to a local problem that then can be scaled. So to me, the need is that we need to invest in the productivity of our local SMEs, in the social innovation of our local communities, and we're keeping the research fruits and the IP that we're generating with Canadian companies, and that's good for Canada.
Mr. Hanley?
That's our time. Oh. So now we'll start our second round with MP Viersen for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks to the witnesses for coming today. As members of Parliament, our job is to ensure that the taxpayer is getting value for their tax dollars. And if our goal is research excellence, then where we put our money in should pursue excellence as well. Our next panel, actually, we're going to hear from an organization called Retraction Watch, and they've done an excellent job of exposing falsified or poor research, and their work ensures that we can move towards research excellence. In 2017, the Liberal government put together a fund called the Canada 150 Research Chairs. Mr. Hanley, your organization understandably welcomed that. One of the new research chairs was Jonathan Pruitt, the chair for biological dystopias, and he received a one-time federal grant of $350,000 for 7 years each. So that's a total of $2.4 million taxpayer dollars. What he did with that money is he wrote a bunch of papers using falsified data. Thanks to Retraction Watch, we know that he had 15 papers retracted over 3 years. So I guess we're pursuing research excellence. How do we prevent this type of fraud from happening going forward? And what are the gaps that might exist to prevent this from happening again?
Sure. It's a great question. And when I started working with U15, we have a committee of vice presidents research, not the specific case, but questions around academic integrity, fraud, and research ethics was right at the center there. I think that nobody has, or no institutions have, a greater interest in ensuring that the system is robust and has a minimum amount of that kind of behavior. I have to admit, I'm not familiar with the case that you're talking about, so I can't really speak to it specifically. But we are absolutely committed to ensuring that our academics are passing rigor, and that the studies that are being put forward are world class, and again, it underscores the importance of peer review. It doesn't mean that certain things don't slip through the cracks. You heard about a few famous studies in the United States that had the same thing, and I don't think it's something you can ever entirely eliminate, but we do everything in our power to try to eliminate it. I think our commitment to it will be steadfast. And I will say that that's the case with all of those, regulatory requirements. I mean, we handle hazardous materials in labs. There's a lot of regulation that needs to be overseen by universities. We think we do it in a way that's excellent, but I think the point to underscore is the reputations that are on the line when those things go wrong are our reputations. And we believe they're world-class, and we do everything we can to protect them as well.
And we continually hear about this peer review process, but at 15 papers, it seems that who's not doing their job if we have 15 papers making it through that peer review process. So we first have the funding granted at the beginning. That's apparently a peer review process, and then you have 15 papers that then are later on retracted. Somewhere along the line, somebody's not saying something, and this is an egregious case in a lot of document or a lot of papers happening. So how do we manage that? How do, from our perspective, the research community is coming to the Canadian government looking for $5 billion annually. How do we manage that?
So it is a challenge, and again, I'm not familiar with the case. I don't know what the journals were that were publishing those various articles, whether they're Canadian journals that are not Canadian journals, and the adjudication processes that were there. One thing that has been an issue of focus, again, for the Vice President's research to try to manage these things across their institutions is the pressure to publish for researchers and the advent of journals that may have easier processes for publishing than others, and what we do to be able to control the proliferation of those journals if they don't have the tight enough requirements. And I'll say the weighting of that against wanting open science and collaboration and not wanting only Nature and Science and a few prestigious journals to control all of the academic currency. So I think there is a balance there. The case you're talking about is clearly egregious, and I mean, I'll tell you, I'll make a point of looking it up after this committee meeting.
Our time. Now we will turn to MP Callaway for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it seems my mic is on as well. I have a comment that I think will lead into the questions that I'm going to ask all three of you. The last meeting that we had was quite interesting. We had researchers that had a particular point of view, right-of-center view. They somewhat jaded, and some comments were made around minority groups and women not holding their own compared to, say, people like me, men. And I thought, should I bring that up? But I do think it's important to have sunlight as the best disinfectant. Although I disagree with them, they had their right to say what they had to say, although I vehemently disagree with it. Which, when I think about the comment about women not, measuring up, I think of people like Dr. Cheryl Bartlett at Cape Breton University. I think of Dr. Jane Lewis, Dr. Colleen Moore-Hayes, and Dr. Shelley Denny, who's Mi'kmaq. And one of the comments that were made at the last session, there was seemingly a discounting of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous research in terms of academia and research. And I wonder if all three of you can you come back to me with a comment on it just doesn't add up or just doesn't measure up to other types of research? And we could start anywhere you'd like.
Sure, I am happy to take that question first. So certainly I think that it's very important that we have continued over the last number of years to invest in Indigenous-led research and research on issues that are affecting First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities in this country. We have a number of our members who are in remote, rural, and northern communities, and they are very dedicated to engaging in problem-based research with their local communities that are really interested in working together with our applied researchers to discover and determine solutions to problems they might be facing around food scarcity or environmental change in the community affecting the local water systems. So in my view, it is important to ensure that we have a diversity of teams, including those that are working with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities to solve the problems that they define as important.
So it would bring value.
It would
bring
value.
opportunity. It would bring curiosity.
And it brings a perspective on the research that perhaps those coming from Southern institutions don't have as part of their research toolkit that enhances the research outcomes.
Okay. Would either of you would like to respond?
Want me to go? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's enormously valuable. First, because, you know, Indigenous peoples are an inherent and fundamental part of life in Canada, and we can't possibly study that aspect of who we are or our history without doing it in collaboration and in the spirit of reconciliation. And that means respecting the history of Indigenous peoples and coming to the table as equals and understanding their experiences and their cultures. I also think that there's a false idea that somehow Indigenous knowledge is in competition with the scientific method. And what I've seen much more is that Indigenous knowledge can feed into, strengthen, add perspectives to the scientific knowledge that method that strengthens our science.
And yourself, would you like to make any comment before we conclude?
I mean, I'd echo what both of my colleagues had to say, and I think that we're at the front end of really appreciating the contributions that Indigenous knowledge can make in all sorts of different areas of science and research. I agree that it isn't a dichotomy or a competition between the two. I think environmental stewardship is just the easiest one to pick on. If you look at Indigenous approaches to forestry and sustainable harvesting, from the land, they're great examples of the contributions that can be made there. And again, I think that the other crucial point here is that, and I watched some of the testimony from last week. I mean, the conversation around the need for diversity of perspectives, which I think we all agree with, but the diversity of perspectives it doesn't just mean progressive and conservative. It means where you come from. It means your lived experience. And in this country, we're privileged to have, a large Indigenous population that we can learn a lot from.
How much time do I have left?
4 seconds.
Thank you very much for your perspectives.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll now turn to MP Blanchet-Chocat for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to continue with Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, your organization says that you want to promote diversity and inclusion, but you emphasize academic excellence. I'd like you to explain to us how you can reconcile these two objectives. As you know, excellence by nature depends on selectivity criteria, such as university ranking and impact factors, and these could exclude certain disciplines and contexts. Well, I think this is an important point. How to change the way in which research is evaluated so as to ensure that we are truly supporting excellence and a diverse and balanced system. As we say in English, I think it's a work in progress. In your comments, I think you have emphasized and underlined an important question. And this is to have an evaluation which goes beyond the number of publications. This has to become a priority now and in the future. Ms. Johnson, it's a pleasure to see you again. Do you think that college researchers are less excellent than university researchers, given that current research funding based on biometric indices penalizes their applied research-focused work rather than the scientific articles? So your question is, do I think they're less excellent? Do you think that the funding criteria for current research penalizes the researchers doing applied research, as in the universities, rather than the CEGEPs in colleges and institutes? I think we have to extend the criteria to better reflect the fact that college researchers are in research partnerships. It's always partnerships, always based on a problem to be solved. This means that criteria should include relevance and the scope of research. Right now, the criteria is too limited. We have to broaden what it is that we want with the research spin-offs. So yes, they are penalized. Thank you.
You had 5 seconds left, do you? Okay, okay. We'll now turn to MB Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I think I'll just, again, turn to Mr. Hanley to talk about this idea of the pressure to publish papers. We heard just some statistics of 22, I think, papers that had bad peer review. I just checked online, and there's between 2 and 8 million papers published per year, so 22 is probably fairly insignificant in that overall total, but it points to the fact that there's this real pressure for researchers to publish, both for career advancement and to get grant money. I'm just wondering if you could talk, expand on the, how we measure the impact and excellence of that research when we're funding research in Canada, because that's the gist of this study.
Sure. It's a great question. I'll say, I mean, although I did a graduate degree, I'm not a researcher by background or training as you are. But again, in terms of academic fraud, we take it extraordinarily seriously. I do think it's a tiny percentage. It still is, especially when you're talking about critical scientific studies, important beyond the reputation of the university. It's critical for the credibility of the entire scientific method and gives credence to conspiracy theories and all sorts of other odious things in society. So I think we do need to stand on guard against it. In terms of the impact of research across Canada, and I will say, to your previous question about the provinces, I think that research, and especially some of the excellence-based projects like CFRAF is a good example, really serve to bring researchers together across different universities and regions. I mean, yes, there's sort of a home base institution for these projects, but all of them have clusters and partnerships that span the country and bring together researchers across the country that are at the top of their fields, right? And nonprofit organizations and businesses and others in those projects that are really meant as an own the podium type exercise for Canada. So this is really about building platforms up that help us be able to compete on the global stage. So, and again, whether it's in, cardiac research that saves the lives of Canadians, or the lipid nanoparticles that you're familiar with coming out of UBC that helped unlock mRNA vaccines, or social research or economic theory or whatever that solve problems or give us new perspectives on issues. Research impacts our lives every day.
And that's our time. Thank you so much to our witnesses, Perry Johnson, Dylan Hanley, and Gabriel Miller, for your testimonies and participating in the committee studies. Please see the clerk for any questions, or if you have any additional information you would like to submit, you may do so through the clerk. We're going to spend very briefly now to allow the witnesses to leave, and we'll resume with our second panel. again so that we can finish in good time. A brief reminder for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. It's now my pleasure to welcome from Polytechnics Canada, Sarah Wachs-Reinert, the Chief Executive Officer, and from Research Canada and Alliance for Health Discovery, Alison Evans, President and Chief Executive Officer. And online, we have from Retraction Watch, Ivan Oransky, co-founder, and we welcome you by video conference. Up to 5 minutes will be given to each of you for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Ms. Wachs-Reinert, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to be back before this committee as you study the criteria being used to award federal research funding. Polytechnics and institutes of technology have now been engaged in Canada's research ecosystem for more than 20 years. As experts at partner-driven research, these institutions help organizations of all sizes adopt, implement, and commercialize new products and processes through applied research. Despite 2 decades of doing this work, there are a number of barriers to accessing federal research funding. For the purposes of my remarks today, I'll focus on 3. One is the minimal access to research support funding, a poor understanding of the salary composition of principal investigators at polytechnics, and adjudication criteria that favor research and publication-intensive CVs. So let's just start with the first. The federal government invests more than $450 million each year in the Research Support Fund. According to this fund's website, it supports post-secondary institutions, maintain modern labs and equipment, secure research from threats, enable research management and administrative support, and meet regulatory and ethical standards. For polytechnics and colleges, this fund is largely beyond reach. In fact, together, they share about half of 1% of the Research Support Fund. The College and Community Innovation Program is excluded from eligibility calculations, and this means virtually no funding for administrative support, research security, or maintaining labs and equipment. These activities must be funded elsewhere. Moving on to the second barrier, polytechnics and colleges hire faculty to be in the classroom. And while their university counterparts are compensated to spend part of their time on research activities, polytechnic instructors have a full teaching load. And as a result, experts drawn from the classroom to participate in research must be backfilled. This wouldn't be a barrier at all if federal research funding programs had faculty release provisions for those who need them. Instead, because programs are built for the university model, my member institutions are actively disadvantaged right from the proposal stages, and this just means that winning conditions are missing. Barrier number 3 drives to the heart of the matter. The vast majority of federal grants are built on an application process geared to individual principal investigators. Applications are often evaluated based on the background of an individual who is preparing the application. For example, it's relatively common in grant competitions to judge the merit of a proposal by the quality, quantity, and significance of past experience and publications. In the polytechnic context, applied research is a team effort. While research projects are often led by faculty members, activity is delivered out of the Office of Applied Research. And while this approach has no diminishing effect on the quality of the research, it raises challenges to participation in a system that is based around the expertise of a single individual. So while peer review and research excellence are absolutely important criteria when awarding federal research funding, they aren't sufficient on their own. The current system has a bias for research that is done in the same way by the same kind of researcher as it has been well before polytechnics and colleges had begun even developing their research capacity. And this is quite restrictive. To fully utilize Canada's ecosystem, the process by which funding is awarded must be reviewed and reconsidered. Thank you very much for inviting me today, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We will now turn to Alison Evans for an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bon après-midi. Merci au Comité permanent de la science et de la recherche de m'avoir invité ici aujourd'hui.
Thank you for the Standing Committee on Science and Research for inviting me here today. I'm delighted to be able to offer you some comments as you study the impact of the various funding awarding criteria and their impact on research excellence in Canada.
Evans, I am the CEO of Research Canada, which is an alliance for health discovery and innovation. Our 130-plus members include hospital research institutes, pharmaceutical and life sciences companies, medtech and AI startups, post-secondary institutions, provincial health organizations, and health charities. Through Research Canada, we work together and with national partners, stakeholders, governments on shared interests. This includes the vision of a vibrant, productive, world-leading health, research, and innovation system, one where better outcomes are pursued by teams in hospital research institutes, corporate and academic labs, through clinical trials, and at the bedside. Such a system is critical if we're going to address declining health and wealth of Canadians and reassert this country on the global stage. Our most complex societal challenges increasingly require novel solutions and approaches that bring together many perspectives from diverse domains. Research is more international, collaborative, interdisciplinary, and we need to respond by continually improving a research support system that exemplifies excellence and integrity, that fosters collaboration amongst researchers and entrepreneurs, institutions and companies, strengthens our ability and capacity to respond to health, environment, economic, demographic, energy, technology, and other opportunities and challenges, helps us attract and support, retain top talent, recognizes that knowledge is created by investigator-initiated research today, and that same research will help us drive the mission-driven needs of tomorrow. And it also needs to be a system that takes calculated risks and uses evidence to inform continuous improvement. So we welcome these timely dialogues on how we fund research and today's conversation about research excellence in all its forms. Of course, it's a broad term and thus necessitates comprehensive and continual consideration. It encompasses how research is designed, conducted, assessed, funded, and used. It's context-specific, and it acknowledges that flexible, tailored approaches are required, and it adjusts as new evidence comes to light and as science and society evolve. In Canada, upholding research excellence is an aspiration and responsibility held by many, by federal granting agencies and other funders, and the use of independent, competitive, structured merit review processes are what guide the decision-making. In the case of health, these processes help strengthen our entire research to impact pipeline, from discovery, applied, mission-driven, and translational research to the study of healthcare delivery itself, to the implementation of novel and life-saving treatments and processes, including AI, into the healthcare system, to our preparedness for future pandemics and other health emergencies. We're fortunate in Canada to have many who protect and promote research excellence, for which Canada is globally renowned. And through the work of the Advisory Panel on Federal Research Support, those that came before them, granting agencies, governments, other funders, and countless stakeholders, we are collectively trying to seize the moment that's before us to modernize our research and innovation system to ensure greater agility, responsiveness, and impact for all. In this changing world, unfortunately, Canada is falling behind talent, innovation, and competitive gaps are widening, and between Canada and other advanced economies. Our declining health, prosperity, and quality of life must be addressed in new ways. We must use longstanding strengths, our growing prominence in areas like AI, clean energy, biotech, life sciences, our highly educated population, our approaches to excellence to reassert ourselves globally and drive economic growth, prosperity, job creation, and outcomes that matter for all Canadians. Je serais ravie d'en discuter en plus ou
I'd be happy to elaborate or to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll turn to our final witness. Mr. Oransky, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present my views on this important issue today. I'm a co-founder of Retraction Watch, a nonprofit news organization based in the U.S., which reports on scientific misconduct and reactions to it by universities, publishers, and funding agencies, among other issues. We also maintain the world's most comprehensive database of scholarly retractions for Crossref, another nonprofit, which acquired the database in 2023. I'm also a distinguished journalist in residence at New York University's Arthur Carter Journalism Institute and editor-in-chief of The Transmitter, a publication covering neuroscience. I base my comments on 14 years of reporting and writing about relevant issues at Retraction Watch. Last year, there were well over 10,000 retractions from the scholarly literature. Of note, just dozens of 2023's 10,000 plus retractions included researchers affiliated with Canadian universities. While that 10,000 figure was an 88% jump from 2022, the growth reflects an overall trend since the turn of the century. Increased scrutiny of the literature is largely responsible for that rise, but 2023 revealed that a significant portion of what is published every year, conservative estimates are at least 2%, although it was likely higher, is produced simply to game the metrics that determine career and institutional success. I wish to quote Dan Pearson, who studies how researchers can engage larger audiences. Quote, "Academic publishing is a game, and a lucrative one for those who win," end quote. That gaming is in large part being carried out by what are known as paper mills, shady organizations that sell papers to researchers desperate to publish lest their careers perish. They also sell authorships, and our reporting has revealed that some of these companies even bribe editors to publish papers by their clients. All of this is an entirely predictable response to standard incentives in academia. Universities around the world demand that researchers publish a high volume of papers, as many as possible in prestigious journals. That's because influential international rankings, such as those created by Times Higher Education, prioritize citations, which are, of course, references to a researcher's work in subsequent papers. Citations are very easy to game, as paper mills know. Knowing that citation counts are an oft-used metric to judge the quality and impact of research, citation cartels ensure that members' citation counts rise. All of this means there is an uncomfortable truth behind the press releases, advertisements, and other material universities and countries use to crow about their high rankings. These rankings are based on a house of cards built with a stacked deck. With good intentions, it's easy for governments and funding agencies to fall into the same trap. After all, we all rely on heuristics, apparently validated shortcuts, if you will, to make decisions, particularly when faced with a large number of choices. But citation heuristics pave the road to bad behavior and retractions. China offers a lesson here. Their publishing incentives have been among the most extreme in the world. And while they do top some impact and innovation rankings, they also top a ranking they probably wish they didn't. More than half of retractions in the world are by authors affiliated with Chinese universities. I was therefore pleased to learn, as the committee heard from Jeremy Kerr last week, that 5 major Canadian research funding agencies have signed onto the Declaration on Research Assessment, also known as DORA. Others have suggested that instead of counting papers and citations, funders examine a small selection of papers chosen by researchers being evaluated. In other words, quality over quantity. Such efforts will require effort and resources. but progress in research is worth it. Thank you for your time, and I welcome the opportunity to expand on my comments during the Q&A with members of the committee.
Thank you to our witnesses for those opening remarks. I'll now open the floor to questions. Please be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed. And we'll start off our 6-minute round, please, with MP Viersen.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Oransky, I'd like to begin my questions with you. As we heard in your opening statement, Retraction Watch reports on scientific misconduct and retractions by many of its corporations. I've many questions regarding much of the things that you've said. But one thing I wanted to draw attention to the committee was something that you had on your website. A psychiatrist in Canada, this is an article on your website titled, "A Psychiatrist in Canada Faked Brain Imaging Data in Grant Application," says U.S. Federal Watchdog. I read in Retraction Watch that Romina Mirazi received grants from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research for nearly 3 million Canadian dollars and worked on this in the Department of Psychiatry at McGill University, where it appears that none of her papers have been retracted yet. So my question is, by rewarding the pursuit of publishing, how are we getting taxpayer dollars valued in this?
Thank you for the question. I want to sort of make a pitch in response, if I may, that perhaps as it is considering, as this committee and of course the government is considering how to look at research, how to examine it, how to assess it, it might also consider some contributions, some funding that is specifically delineated for looking at problems in the literature. In other words, sleuthing behavior, which is mostly done right now by volunteers, even though publishers and universities benefit from their work. If you look, for example, at the case of the Office of Research Integrity, which is responsible in the U.S. for oversight of research at the National Institutes of Health and some other agencies, but that's a $48 billion budget, roughly, that's U.S. dollars. Its budget is about $15 million, and I would have you all maybe consider whether or not there is a way to use some of the funding that is now being used to fund research directly to fund analysis of that research and to actually keep a check on it so that I believe the public will be much more confident in what it reads about, what it's funding with its tax dollars, and what eventually, in many cases, and certainly in the case that you mentioned, could contribute, if it's done properly, to better health and better outcomes.
One of the concerns that we've been hearing from academia is just around the declining trust in their institution. How would we ensure that if folks are getting research dollars, that it's being used appropriately and that we can ensure when I go back to my constituents and say, hey, these research dollars that are being spent well. Is there tweaks to we keep hearing about this peer review process. Is there things that we need to do maybe differently than the peer review?
I think in general, one method and one approach that a number of organizations are taking, and it's still a work in progress, is to have everything be much more open. That could mean publishing data openly, making sure that anyone who wanted to check those figures or take a look at the images or whatever it was had an opportunity to do that. That could be other researchers. It could be the general public. If you publish your data openly, it's at least a statement that you are going to stand behind it. In fact, again, more people can look at it. I think in terms of the peer review system, that is obviously a larger conversation that I'd be happy to have another time. But the idea that is a number of people have floated is we need to simply push far less through the peer review system, and we need to acknowledge its limitations. I actually still believe peer review is very powerful and important, but I also think that the public and many people even in science have been sold a bill of goods about how much peer review can actually catch and how good a system it is. It's being sold sort of as a good housekeeping seal of approval when in fact it is incredibly porous. And I think if we're honest about that, trust will follow.
Okay. You said you'd like to talk about peer review more broadly. Can you point us in the direction that you're thinking there?
There's a meeting actually every 4 years, sort of like the Olympics. It's held in Chicago that I heartily recommend. It's the Peer Review Congress. And people are actually looking in an empirical way, in other words, an evidence-based way, at where peer review could improve and how there are various ways to do that. The fact, though, is that at the moment, peer review is jamming, publishers are jamming millions of papers, as you all heard earlier today, through a system that simply is overstressed. And you can't really expect efficient quality control until you acknowledge that the system just doesn't have the resources.
Okay. Is there a second, I think you mentioned this earlier, and I just want to get you corrected on this. Is there kind of, in addition to peer review, is there a mechanism that we can use when assessing these projects to fund?
I think there is, and it actually is sort of, in some ways, consistent with peer review. I suppose that may seem contradictory, but hear me out for a moment. I think that instead of looking at citation counts, which are sort of born of the publisher-parish incentives and the very pernicious incentives, perhaps rather than turning everything into a metric, we should look at the quality of the research and look at a handful of papers that a particular maybe individual is publishing, maybe a larger number for a research project. We heard earlier from one of my colleagues on the panel that there are people who are excluded from that because they are excluded from grant applications.
I'm sorry, that's our time. So we're going to turn to our next questioner now, MP Diab, for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today as we continue on our study of how do we fund, how do we award federal research dollars. And if I can just, with the couple of minutes I have, just turn my attention to Ms. Evans and talk a little bit about Research Canada and the health discovery. Your organization is dedicated to advancing health research and health innovation, and you mentioned you have over 130 plus members, and I guess through collaborative work and so on with various of these partners. So in the health field, how do we ensure that those funding decisions are independent, I guess, from any interference, whether it's political or otherwise? And I will put it in the context of since the pandemic, maybe even before that, but we've certainly seen it since. Or I'm asking you, have you seen a rise in distrust of researchers and research generally, and what would you say the role of a parliamentarian should be in that? And again, I'm talking and I'm asking questions relevant to your expertise and experience in health and your role in that.
Okay, I heard a few questions in there, so I'll start in and hopefully get to some points that are important to you. First of all, I really welcome the fact that we have a Parliamentary Health Research Caucus that is nonpartisan. It has leaders coming from all parties, gives us an opportunity to bring the latest health research and innovation topics to Parliament and policymakers. And in fact, we consult to hear what some of the themes that are most important on the minds of people who have constituents that they're representing. I think it's safe to say that health is on all of our minds all the time, whether it's our own, our loved ones, our colleagues, or people we represent. And, it's a great privilege to be able to bring the latest. And I think that the pandemic actually, in many ways, increased Canadians' focus on the importance of health research. We had a very incredible response with mission-driven and rapid response research. The government worked across departments with companies, huge multinational pharmaceutical companies, innovation and research hubs at universities all across the country, and every part of this country were involved in that response. And, we've come out with lessons learned that will make us even stronger the next time.
So, for that. I would agree with you. Sitting home when COVID hit, just like most people were sitting in their homes, I was a provincial politician at the time, and a lot of discussion, not discussion, but a lot of phone calls or emails with constituents at the time, and certainly reading social media, and there were still some papers left at that time, was the need for Canada to do more or to do better or to have our own research labs, and how could this happen, and, you know, what can we ensure for the next time. But move forward a couple of years later when, you know, the pandemic was over and everybody was out of their homes and their basements and their screens and so on. It seems to me the conversation then shifted quite a bit, where there was still people thinking that, but others were sort of, you know, a bit cynical in terms of research and you know, the discussion just for many also shifted. How do you find, or how would you sort of help us to address some of that? And would you say is there any value, or what the value would be in research project that might contribute broader to this type of research?
You know, I think that, I guess it depends again on where these discussions are happening. The discussions that I'm involved in every day are looking at things like how artificial intelligence is going to revolutionize the delivery of healthcare. And when we think about the incredible costs of healthcare delivery, the budgets of the provinces, the way we're trying to revolutionize things, you know, there's actually quite a bit of excitement around the science. I can think of a huge announcement in Ontario just a week or so ago between Roche Canada and Invest Ontario, which is going to see more than 250 new jobs created there for clinical research. I can think of researchers that we've lost to American universities who are really hoping to come back to Canada and hire Canadians into their highly technically advanced manufacturing industries. So I think there's a lot of excitement. So I think we have to balance our questions, our healthy debates, by also applauding the excellence and incredible work that is going on, and allowing ourselves occasionally to be excited about the future that we're building.
Yeah, no, so I'm hearing that from you, and I you know, the more I hear, the more I tend to agree. The artificial intelligence, most of us, it's not something that, you know, where we were privy to get education on or even knew anything about. And I'm just wondering now, I'm actually excited about the young generation that is learning on that. So thank you for that. Thanks, Madam Chair.
And that's our time. So MP Blanchard-Chalcott, you've got the floor for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Mes premières questions.
Thank you, Chair. My first questions will be for Ms. Watts-Weiner. I've heard in your presentation that you talked about anonymizing funding applications versus CVs. Could you elaborate on that proposal? This may remove some biases.
I don't think I'm thinking so much about anonymizing the applications. What I'm suggesting is in the criteria to assess project proposals, that there is a great degree of emphasis on the degree to which somebody has had previous funding and has published. And I think that doesn't align with the type of research that is happening within the polytechnic and college sector. And therefore, they're already behind the 8 ball when it comes to being, having their proposal approved.
D'accord. Donc, si je comprends bien, votre proposition, c'est que...
I see. So in other words, if I've understood you correctly, their funding background should not influence future funding for a researcher.
That's right. I think that would probably be the only way that you can ever really get around the idea that we're putting a lot of money in the same institutions for the same kinds of research with the same kind of researchers with a similar background. If you want to expand the kind of research done beyond what's been done in the past, you really have to take a look at the criteria being used.
Si nous poursuivons dans la même logique, est-ce que vous êtes...
So if we continue with the same line of reasoning, do you believe that financing should not influence the number of research chairs awarded to institutions or to researchers?
I think that there's the ability to be able to bring expertise to the table doesn't speak to what the past research history has been. And I think that when we think about trying to bring in any new kind of research or any new kind of researcher, anything that is beyond what has been done before, it does speak to what are the review criteria, what questions are we asking. And in order to have any kind of expansion of what research is in the country, we need to perhaps look beyond what has happened before. I don't have a problem with one institution having multiple research chairs or research research centers, because you can have more than one expertise in a large institution. But I do have some difficulty with the idea that research funding has largely been concentrated in a very few, when there are clearly very valuable contributions to be made with a wider community of researchers.
Bien compris, merci beaucoup. Je vais poursuivre mes prochaines questions pour Monsieur Orensky.
I understand, thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. Orensky a question now. I'd like to hear what you have to say about Yves Gingras' publications confirming that the bibliometric system was initially designed to use as a censor for publications, but now is using for awarding funding. So if you have a lot of articles, you can have an H-index increase in your impact factor. Does that promote a proliferation of forced or fraudulent articles, which are often retracted afterwards?
Yes, thank you. I think that there is a direct relationship between gaming these metrics, such as you mentioned the H-index, as well as other metrics that are similar, and the production of, I would certainly say, sloppy research. In other words, if you will, the overproduction of research. There is a tension between quantity and quality, and I think that the system has so overemphasized and so over-rewarded quantity that quality has suffered a great deal. And so we often say at Retraction Watch that sort of fraud and misconduct and sloppiness are all born, if you will, of the same mother. And the mother is the pressure to publish. Now, for some researchers, and I would argue most researchers, that simply means pushing harder, trying to do better work. For some small percentage, although I don't think that it's as small a percentage as a lot of researchers and a lot of scientists and policymakers would like to think, that means that people commit fraud, or they turn to a paper mill, or they in some way basically fudge their results. So I do think that this is a big driver of problematic research.
Monsieur Orensky, le principal outil présentement.
Mr. Orensky, the main tool used for measuring now is the impact factor, used by assessment committees and peer reviewers on those committees. What would you suggest then? If we remove impact factors, could we stop this mechanism of production, potentially fraudulent papers, to be able to have more funding, to have more different use of assessment criteria?
I think that it is worth trying, and that's why I referred to DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, which, in fact, that's one of its main suggestions. One of its main recommendations is to not use the impact factor. I'm often asked, and your question, I think is a fair one in this regard, what should we replace it with? And I would argue we should not replace it with a metric. There's a well-known and sort of quote-unquote law that any metric can be gamed and will eventually be gamed. And so I think what we need to do is get back to basics of reading several papers and engaging with the literature and engaging with the work of a particular group or a particular researcher or department that is being assessed. I think that a qualified group of researchers and others can do that.
Thank you. That's our time. So we'll turn now to Mr. Kennings for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, and I'm going to turn to Mr. Orensky as well right off the bat. Just to, coincidentally today I just got a news notification on my phone from Science about yet another news item of fraud in the science world around peer review. Hackers got in, were pretending to be some scientists writing favorable reviews of things. So, this is a big problem. And as I mentioned just in an earlier testimony, there's between 1 and 8 million papers published every year. It's an absolute tsunami of papers, and I think this has increased dramatically in recent years. You'd know exactly probably that rate, and I know colleagues of mine who, are just refusing to review papers anymore because that's all they do. So I guess you've been talking about some of the ways we can get around this, some of the ways we can try to reduce this problem. And part of it, as you say, is this pressure to publish both quantity and, maybe game the system for the quality. And I'm just wondering if you could we've all been talking about DORA here and there, and I just wanted to maybe give you some more time to speak to that initiative and how it works and how we perhaps should be using that more than other ways of measuring the quality of science produced.
Sure, thank you. And I want to be clear that while we, of course, have reported on DORA, and I'm familiar with it, I in no way, of course, speak for DORA or any of the signatories. It's essentially a manifesto, and there's actually another one called the Leiden Manifesto, which does something a bit different, but is getting at the same problem and looking at what are known as bibliometrics, I think a term that came up previously in this hearing, whether or not those are a good way to measure research or to assess research. And I would also note that there are a number of very good bibliometric scholars in Canada and around the world, of course, but as well, particularly in Canada, Vincent Larivière, a name I may be mispronouncing, I apologize, but in Montreal has done a lot of important work in this area, and I might commend his work and perhaps his testimony to you in the future if he hasn't already. So it's in a short period of time, it's difficult to really go into detail about DORA and others, but the general idea is that other metrics, if need be, or just other ways to assess research, and we heard about some of those also previously in this on this panel, should be considered. And so, for example, impact can be measured by whether or not research makes a difference. In other words, it literally has an impact. Has it been cited in policy documents? Has it led to change? Has it led to better outcomes? This is a very downstream sort of way to measure the impact of research, but I would also argue there are other ways to measure whether or not a particular piece of research or a group of, in other words, findings in general, have contributed to, do we know more about whether it's the universe, whether it's about biology, whether it's about neuroscience? And I think that all of that is by way of, if we need to replace metrics such as the impact factor, these are, again, we all need heuristics, we all rely on heuristics. These are ways to do that.
And is there any duty here on the part of the publishers of the scientific works to, police their own publications, to do that work to investigate how their own publications may be gamed and make sure that they're publishing high quality work? We all know there's a kind of gradient of quality in publication and publication houses. Is there some responsibility there, on their part to make sure that quality is maintained?
I would certainly argue that there is. I would also note that the publishing industry is largely unregulated. It's been very interesting to watch which regulators, particularly in the U.S., which is where I'm obviously most familiar, have actually pursued, whether it's sanctions or even civil findings, settlements against publishers. And it's been here mostly on the part of the Federal Trade Commission and sort of false advertising claims, as opposed to what you would hope would be the health agencies, the funding agencies that would be particularly concerned. Publishers, I think, now could also face scrutiny from agencies like the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Obviously, there are agencies like that around the world, because a number of them are publicly traded. So that might offer another lever. But essentially, right now, they respond very well to shame and to sort of public shaming when they're on the front pages of newspapers. But until quite recently, they have not taken what I would consider the necessary steps to police the literature to clean it up.
So you think it takes, articles like this in Science Today around Elsevier that will shame Elsevier into cleaning up their act?
I of course can't speak for them, but I've seen, again, over the 14 years that Adam Marcus and I have been running Retraction Watch, that with more and more attention comes more and more cleaning, more and more retractions. I think that there's a clear relationship with that. There's also the more ability for what we call sleuths, people who actually find, heroic people who find the issues in the literature to do something, in other words, to make those findings public. So I think the combination of those things has had an important effect, but
Thank you.
There's much more to be done.
That's over our time. Thank you. We'll now turn to MP Tucker for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Carrying on the questions for Retraction Watch, let's make another journal famous here. We have the International Journal of Hydrogen Energy, and a paper that was published in there. In the paper itself, it states, as strongly requested by the reviewers, here we cite some references. 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47. 13 sightings. And this is what's in the paper. It continues, although they are completely irrelevant to the present work, end quote. That was the researcher that was getting pressured by the reviewer to add those citations that had nothing at all to do with the paper itself. How often does something like this happen?
Thank you for the question. Something that blatant, in other words, where we actually see the evidence for it, is still fairly rare. What is much more common, and probably far more common than anyone would like to admit, is pressure on authors, pressure even from editors sometimes. There are journals that they want to increase their impact factor, something we just heard about, of course. And so what they do is they say, well, they don't quite come out and say this, but they say, there are review recommendations, go back, letters to the authors, and it says, well, we would really appreciate it if, or it would be better if you cited, a paper from our journal or something like that. And then it gets even more complex, a little bit harder to track, where they have these, and I use this phrase in my testimony, citation cartels, where people actually organize rings. There's a citation rings. And all of this, again, we don't know exactly how often it happens, but if you were to speak to a bunch of researchers, I doubt that any of them would, if they were being honest, and I would like to think they would be, would say that they've never had an experience where someone in some way has pressured them to cite their work, whether it's a reviewer, an editor, or even someone else. And so I think we need to, and this again is a natural outgrowth, if you will, a completely predictable response. People just respond to incentives, to knowing that you need your H index to be higher. And what's a good way to do that is to make sure that you are cited more often.
Switching gears a little bit, first off, thank you for the work that you do, the public service you do for not just for Americans, but an international audience, and to ensure that we have the best possible science out there. One of the things you shared was a little bit troubling, is that how few were catching up in Canada. Now, is this a good sign that research is healthy in Canada, or is it perhaps we're just not going through as much scrutiny as what is taking place in other countries?
I'll say something that perhaps would have been controversial some years ago, which is that there should be more retractions from Canada. And I don't mean any disrespect to your great nation. There should be more retractions from the United States of America. I could go on. The fact is that it's good news that we're finding them, and there are fields and, in fact, journals sometimes. And in the case that we heard earlier in the previous panel about Jonathan Pruitt was actually a case where it's pretty bad news that this, and I do believe the number retractions. I could double check our database again. But it's bad news that that story happened. It's bad news that the misconduct happened. But what's worse news is how long it took to actually adjudicate. And so that's one sort of lesson from that story. The other, though, and here's some good news, is that the group of researchers from around the world that got together and actually said, we don't want people who Jonathan Pruitt to have any more collateral damage than they already might. And that led to a lot of retractions, but also protection for those researchers who really were victims of Jonathan Pruitt. And so I think all these stories are complex. And so I frequently am asked, what about this field? What about that field? What about this country? And I say, if there are fewer retractions, it's because people aren't looking. I trust when I actually see more retractions, and maybe that's easy for me to say given my work, but I actually think that's an important way to think about it.
Follow-up question on, if you had a said government that would like to promote a false narrative, how much money do you think it would need to be poured into research to make, depending on the claim, seem real? How expensive would it be for an entity to fund research with the purpose of miscommunicating or miseducating the public?
It's a good question, and I'm going to answer, hopefully, with respect hypothetically, obviously. But I think that it's actually trivial if you wanted to, for example, fund a large body of research. I'm not even sure you would need the funding. You could actually sort of do other things to make sure that that work was published and then cited, and then eventually ending up in policy documents and in guidelines and et cetera, and maybe even in regulations. So I think it's just not that hard to get and I'm not talking about any particular area here or field, but it is not that hard to move a field in a particular direction based on basically pushing on those publishing levers.
Our time. Thank you very much. So now we'll turn to MP Callaway. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. My questions, I'm going to try to get questions for all of you, but I have 5 minutes, so we'll see where we go from there. But Ms. Watts-Bernard, I really appreciate you bringing up polytechnics and the difference between how research entities measure university research as compared to polytechnics. And where I'm from, the polytechnic would be the Nova Scotia Community College. And I really appreciate you making the distinction in terms of the criteria that is used and how that needs to change. MP Lobb mentioned, used an example of research that can help move bricks and construct different things, and I think that's of value. I also think humanities have value as well, but I do think they're apples and oranges. I'm not sure what the purpose is behind, for example, studying unpaid work by women in Bogota, but I could take a guess if I drill down deeper, it might be to do a comparison between Canada and Bogota, just an assumption on my part, or learn best practices, again, assuming because I haven't drilled down on it. But I want to go back to the applied research side. I think there's a huge sandbox for us in terms of applied research. And you talked about some of the recommendations, but I want to drill down as what is the most important recommendation, we'll have many, that you want to see when you open up the report as it relates to Polytechnic and how Polytechnics get important investment to help Canadians, and it's okay to say this, and the world.
Maybe where I'd start with that is what I'd really like to see in the report is a desire to start thinking about research funding in a way that is much more evenly distributed across different kinds of research and different kinds of results. That is not to say it's not important to have research of all types and to be thinking about primary investigator-led research of the kind that is happening at universities across the country and around the world. I think the problem is that there's not an equal or even a realistic amount of emphasis also placed on taking that knowledge and actually disseminating it to the companies, to the individuals, to the organizations across the country and around the world that can use that research. And I use artificial intelligence as an example. Canada's a leader around artificial intelligence in theory, in the theory behind it, but the application in small and medium-sized companies, in large companies, is minimal. And so there is a leap to be made between that investigator-led primary research and how it then expands into the ecosystem. And that's really where I'd like to see the committee put some emphasis.
Thank you for that. Just one quick question, then I'll go on to Mr. Ornsky. But back in my day, and I don't know if it's still the same, but in university settings, the principal investigator has the intellectual property. In the community college that I worked at, that wasn't the case. It was the institution. Is that still the same across Canada, or is it specific to just Nova Scotia?
With applied research, the intellectual property largely rests with the business partner.
Okay.
So while it is being created in collaboration, it's vested with the business partner so that they're able to go and turn that into a product or a service without encumbering IP being held by the institution at all.
I think that's an important distinction that we need to make on this committee. Mr. Ornsky, I only have about a minute according to my my phone. I appreciate the work you do, sir. I really do. You talked about, policing things and cleaning it up in terms of people that are fudging numbers or outright lying. And I wonder, beyond shame, which does have an economic penalty and an intellectual penalty, is there anything that we should be doing in terms of other punitive measures for institutions or for principal investigators that do something that they're quite aware they shouldn't be doing?
Sure, thank you. There are some frameworks for that. We looked a number of years ago at how many researchers like that had faced criminal sanctions. It was about one a year for the last 40 years at the time we looked, so quite rare. Some would argue that should change. There are sanctions that sound somewhat administrative or bureaucratic, but where universities can be denied sort of milestone payments or ongoing payments if they are not complying with certain regulations or certain checks. And I think that, again, in the U.S., there's the Office of User Integrity and NSF, Office of Inspector General, which both, it's complicated, and so I may be overstating the case, but they can sanction, or sanctions can be emitted from their office, I should say, where people can lose their funding.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's the end of our time there. So now we will turn to MP Blanchet-Choquin for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to continue with Mr. Orensky. We know that 80% of funding in Canada is concentrated in only 15 universities. 80% of total funding goes to 20% of researchers only. Why do some organizations choose not to sign the San Francisco Declaration, also called DORA? What benefit do they gain from maintaining a system that gives precedence and privilege to university classification and impact factors rather than being more inclusive?
Unfortunately, I think that your question in some ways, if I understood correctly, answers itself in the sense that it is sort of the rich become richer and the powerful remain more powerful. And so impact factor, just like anything else or any of the metrics that are used, can be used to essentially cement and consolidate funding, and I could even argue power, but that is actually another reason why these are such problematic metrics. So again, researchers at those institutions tend to be cited more often anyway, and then they can just sort of double down on that. And so they have no particular incentive. And I would credit those, if you will, wealthy in terms of funding institutions that have signed the declaration or taken other measures, because I think it signals a real intellectual honesty and a willingness to change that might benefit everyone instead of just continue the sort of Matthew sort of effect.
Merci. J'aimerais vous entendre.
Thank you. I'd like to hear what you have to say about an approach that's already been tried outside Canada. In New Zealand, for example, the Health Research Council in 2015 started random funding. This was also done in Switzerland by the National Research Fund, one of the private foundations. Do you think this is something that could be a potential idea here, to have dedicated random funding so as not to go through the peer reviews?
It's a very interesting idea, and I've read some of the coverage of that, as well as there's even a few studies of what has happened after that. And I think it's early days, and so I think, like everything else, we should be empirical and ensure that a pilot program is really tested, and we look carefully at the evidence with a clear eye. On the other hand, we've also seen evidence that peer reviewers, and I'm talking here about grant reviewers, in other words, grant peer reviewers, often don't do any better in terms of if you were to measure impact later on, or even citations, as flautometric as that is, they don't do any better than a random sort of selection. And so that to me is somewhat troubling, but also would argue for perhaps trying that as a system, at least for some, maybe percentage, maybe it's a pilot program. I also want to recommend the work and writing of someone named Stuart Buck. He's at the Good Science Project, and he's done a lot of really smart thinking about a lot of these issues, in particular
I'm sorry.
Grant review.
Maybe you could, yes, because we're almost running out of resources. We'll now turn to MP Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Ms. Evans. You represent Research Canada, Health Research Alliance, and you mentioned that increasingly health research has become more international, more collaborative. How would the federal government measure the excellence of those projects?
Well, I think that research across all domains is sort of a global endeavor, and researchers collaborate sort of beyond geographic boundaries as they attempt to answer very complicated questions. And so I think this is why I mentioned that our sort of the way we consider research excellence needs to be broad, it needs to be tailored and evolving. It changes as science does and as society does. I'm really pleased that in the case of health, when we think about the populations that health research and clinical research in particular is meant to serve, it's really important that clinical trials and other types of research are thinking about the people that we want to have as benefactors and the impacts that we want to have. So I think the same principles apply. The kinds of things that we have talked already about in this meeting. I mean, we need to think about ethics. We need to think about integrity. I think openness has come through as a theme today as being very important. It's important that people understand that what they're doing and their results are going to be open and public so that they can be scrutinized and shared, and people can build on what's being learned. We also need to make sure the knowledge is being translated. This was mentioned by some of my fellow presenters today, the need to move ideas through to commercialized changes that we then put into the healthcare system or that are taken by companies, and that Canadians are getting access to these things in a timely and affordable way. I hope that answers your question.
Sure, yeah.
16 seconds.
Okay. I don't
You're
want us to run out of resources. So.
Okay, that's great. So thank you very much to our witnesses. If there's something that you wanted to mention that you didn't get a chance to cover in your testimony today, you may submit it in writing to the clerk. So I want to thank you for your participation. I do want to inform the committee that I will be presenting to the House this Thursday our report on funding of post-secondary institutions. So I'll be presenting that. Also, Thursday, December the 5th is our deadline for submitting our witnesses for the antimicrobial study. And we'll meet again on Thursday. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn this meeting? Oh, I'm sorry.
Point d'information, Madame la Présidente, simplement pour...
Point of information, for tabling your report tomorrow, Thursday. This is going to be done with the press release at the same time?
Yes.
Bien, merci beaucoup.
Excellent, thank you.
Detailed, the analyst did a good job. Thank you very much, everyone. Great meeting today.
Meeting adjourned.
Oh, meeting adjourned. As if everyone...